Hi, I'd like to thank the student groups that are organizing this, and also the Global Cities Initiative of Georgetown. I think it's a really great opportunity to tie different people together across different programs, different schools, different points of view. And sort of I'm honored to be part of this sort of first conversation that I hope will be the first of many that are held open for folks across the university and sort of more broadly as well. Today, we have the honor of having Juan Jose Mendez, who is the Secretary of Transportation and Public Works of the city of Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires is in Argentina. Buenos Aires is very well known for sort of being a leader in terms of transportation policy over the course of the last few years, and especially recently. So we look forward to hearing about what the city is doing, some of the challenges it faces, and then having some questions. I'd say if you've got questions that come up through the course of the presentation, please put them in the chat box, and hopefully we're planning on having at least half of the session for questions, so we'll have time to get to many of them, we hope. So, Juan Jose, we can't wait to hear your presentation.
Thank you very much, Robin. Thank you, Juliana. Thank you, Enrique. Thank you everyone for being here this evening. For me, it's an honor to be part of this, to share with you what we've been doing here in Buenos Aires. And I prepared a quick presentation to have like a few minutes to talk about what we've been doing in the past decade in the city of Buenos Aires in terms of sustainable transportation. And after that, if you agree, I can answer questions, listen to your remarks, or wherever we can talk about. Well, a few things about the city of Buenos Aires. It's one of the biggest cities in Latin America. It has a metropolitan area of 15 million inhabitants. The city itself, where I work, the city of Buenos Aires, the capital city of Argentina, is 3 million inhabitants in this metropolitan area, with 9 million trips per day inside the city of Buenos Aires. The metropolitan area accounts of a third of the population of the Argentine country. It's a huge imbalance in terms of population distribution in Argentina. What we've been doing in the past 10 years in Buenos Aires. I've been at the Department of Transportation for 11 years right now, in different positions. Responsible of the department in the past 5 years as the secretary. And when we started 10 years ago, we started with the goal of shifting the perspective of the way we deal with transportation planning in the city of Buenos Aires. In the past, the city was very car oriented, and it was always planned with the car in mind instead of the people in mind. I mean, it was not, even though 100 years ago, we used to have mass transit, tramways, commuter rails, and everything. Starting the 70s, the introduction of avenues, highways, and a lot of infrastructure for cars shift the focus of the city into cars. And that's the image on the left part of the screen of 9 de Julio Avenue, how it used to be. And at that time, 10 years ago, we decided to prioritize mass transit, public transportation, and to start reclaiming public space for mass transit, public space for pedestrian, public space for cyclists. And that's what is what we are going to see during this presentation. This is the example of the downtown area, how it was reconverted. Downtown area, it used to be an area with no people living, only offices, some shops related to the offices and to the activities that operated during the daily hours. But after 6 p.m., it was an abandoned area without population or without restaurants, without any attraction. 6 years ago, approximately, we start the reconversion of the downtown area into a pedestrian area, and we changed the geometry and the design of 260 blocks in downtown and in certain neighborhoods surrounding the downtown area, benefiting 2 million inhabitants and starting to shift the way the area was recognized by the neighbors of the city. It not only was, right now, it is not only a business area, but it's also, there's more people living in the area, and the reconversion is being very successful in terms of how the mixed use that we are having right now in the downtown area changed the perception of safety, the perception even of environmental, the environmental perception of the area shifted a lot too. Then in 2009, we started with the introduction of bikes in the city of Buenos Aires. The city of Buenos Aires, it has great weather, it's mild weather, we don't have snow on winter, not even very hot summers, and it's a plain city, and 65% of the trips made every day inside the city of Buenos Aires, they cover distances less of 6.5 kilometers. So in a plain city with mild weather and with millions of trips made every day that are covering less than 5 kilometers, we realized that there was a huge opportunity to introduce bike into the modal split of the city. We asked the population why didn't use bikes, because we realized that there was around 1 million of bikes inside of the homes of the porteños, of the neighbors, but those bikes were bought just for recreational purposes, you know, for using them during the weekends or for sports, but not for commuting. So, and when we start asking them why they didn't use the bike for commuting, 70% of respondents said that they didn't do that because of road safety concerns. Then 60% of responding because of, you know, certain safety concerns, instead that they were afraid, I don't know where to park my bike, if it's going to be safe, or if my bike is going to be robbed. So with that in mind, what we realized is that we had to introduce a fully segregated bike lane networks. And we started 10 years ago, and right now we have 250 kilometers of bike lanes in the city of Buenos Aires, and we moved from 0.4% of the trips in 2010 to 4% of the trips made by bike by 2019. We also introduced a bike sharing system with 2,000 bicycles and 200 stations, which is completely free for every user. They can use the bicycle for free for 30 minutes. And it was a huge success because it was like many people that it wasn't very sure if it was going to be safe to ride a bike in the city of Buenos Aires. They start, you know, renting for free bikes from the bike sharing system, trying the bicycle network, trying and experiencing the idea of riding a bike in the city of Buenos Aires, and then they end up buying their own bike and they start commuting every day with their own bike. Also, in the past 10 years, we've been working a lot in closing the infrastructure gap. I'm talking about closing the infrastructure gap because, as many other Latin American cities and Argentina itself, it has been suffering in the past 100 years from a lot of economical crisis, distress, and problems that it was very difficult to invest in heavy infrastructure needed to, for example, you know, connect neighborhoods, decrease pollution and GHG emissions. And in the past 10 years, we introduced, for example, the Paseo del Bajo, which is the underground highway that we can see in this picture. Before this infrastructure, for example, this avenue that you can see over the ground, it was packed with trucks moving from the harbor that the city of Buenos Aires has in the downtown area. And it was very polluted. The neighborhood of Puerto Madero, which is right next to the downtown area, it was completely disconnected. It was an area that, in the mind of any porteño, it was impossible to think that you can move from downtown area to Puerto Madero walking, because the trucks, the pollution, the lack of safety in the public space, it was a really terrible problem. And we've been discussing this highway even from the 60s. We have projects that started in the 60s, in the 70s, and how to cope with this connector, how to resolve this connector in the central part of the city. And all the solutions, they used to include the car as part of the solution. They used to be the classic highways we know from everywhere, where, you know, they are mainly designed for cars, but then they are also can be used by heavy trucks. And at this point, when we decided to solve this problem, this is an example of how the mind shifted in the past 10 years. We asked ourselves again the question, which is the problem here? Yeah, and the answer was, we don't need a new highway for cars. What we need is just a specific infrastructure for trucks to connect the harbor with the industrial areas in the suburban area of the city of Buenos Aires. And so the infrastructure has to be way more smaller than it used to be planned in the 60s or in the 70s. And it can give place to new public spaces, new parks that you can see in these pictures. So we designed the new infrastructure with the 21st century mind of people first, of, you know, a more environmentally friendly infrastructure to reduce the impact of the trucks and to connect and to integrate neighborhoods in the central area of the city. With this project, we also introduced the Bioadax. We have 850 kilometers of commuter rails in the city of Buenos Aires. This commuter railway system was introduced 100 years ago, and it was on ground level with a lot of grade levels, with cars and with avenues that created a lot of, you know, road safety concerns, with accidents, with also a lot of operational problems for the commuter rail system. And in the past 4 years, we introduced 2 viaducts that allowed us to eliminate over 50 grade level crossings and to improve the quality, the service level of the commuter rail, and also decrease the road safety concerns and the pollution regarding the intersections between the railway tracks and the avenues and city streets. These are examples of the before and after of this infrastructure. And with this, I will jump to these days and the challenges we are facing after the pandemic. We're facing 2 biggest challenges in terms of transportation because of the pandemic. First of all, it's known by everyone. Both of them are known by everyone, but what we're going to see here is how we are responding, and also we are wanting to hear from you new ideas, because this is a recent development. The first challenge is public transport in crisis. I mean, restrictions, because, you know, we cannot have the same amount of people per square meter in trains or in buses or in transfer centers. So we introduce restrictions that decrease the supply of mass transit capacity into the system. Also the fear of infection. I mean, we've been talking a lot about how the mass transit system can be of risk in terms of infections. And also this is pushing the agenda, and it's pushing people to look for individual mobility options. And when they look for individual mobility options, the first answer is the car. And that has a lot of problems, and now I'm going to talk further. And the second challenge is suburbanization, is that people started to require, or now they realize they prefer to live in less dense areas. And why is that? Because mainly in the city of Buenos Aires, but it's happening all over the world, we are now in our 7th month of quarantine, where a lot of people still working from home, still, you know, teaching their kids from home. their homes is the center of the daily life. When in the past, daily life, it used to be mixed between the home, between the offices, between the school, and now everything is happening in the home. And that home that it used to be enough 1 year ago, right now it feels small. It feels that it would be better to have a small backyard or a terrace or a bigger balcony, something, you know, to have more space to develop your life. And I'm going to tell you what we are doing about that. In the public transport crisis, we have, this is the demand we are having in each mode in comparison on how it used to be before the pandemic. Buses are moving 1/3 of the people they used to be moving before pandemic. Commuter rails are in 21%, and subway, which is the most feared mass transit system, is only moving less than 10% of the people it used to be moving before the pandemic. And we use also this McKinsey & Company survey conducted in May in 7 countries, which also strike what we are talking here. They ask people where they feel safer in terms of mobility, and 81% feel safer in cars, 55% walking or cycling, and then all the rest of the supply of transportation services and the most sustainable transportation services we were already all this in all the cities, you know, promoting and pushing. People tend to feel no safety at all, or very unsafe in terms of the perception. And it is also surprisingly in micromobility. The idea of sharing a bike with someone else or sharing a scooter with someone else, it's perceived also very unsafety, which is a huge problem in terms of how are we going to cope, you know, going out from the pandemic and returning to the new normal. What we are doing to that, our first response was, okay, we have 250 kilometers of bicycle lanes. We also know that even though if we, in an hypothetical case, we have the capacity and everyone can ride a car, we have to face that it's gonna be impossible, because many of us, we cannot afford to buy a car to solve all our mobility needs. So this need of individual mobility solutions, it's gonna create a lot of frustration among the population. So what we've done in the past weeks and months is to increase the capacity of the bicycle lanes, introducing also new bicycle lanes in avenues, high capacity bicycle lanes in avenues, which is the picture I'm showcasing right now, with great results. We introduced in 1 month 17 kilometers of new bike lanes in avenues, and we see an increase in almost 200% in the amount on trips. And the most important, and the impact on gender, when we introduce safe infrastructure on cycling mobility, for cyclists, we see how the number of female cyclists triple after the introduction of the infrastructure, which is something we are also always looking very closely, no? What we are doing and how it's going to be the impact on gender, on different ages, on different income populations. And now entering in urbanization. This is happening all over the world. Here we show a few examples from South Africa, New York, or the city of Buenos Aires. And the same with the cars, you know, it's also going to be a matter of frustration in terms of a lot of people that now is wondering or looking for an opportunity to live in a low densities neighborhoods or in areas in the suburbs. It is economically impossible for them. And even though if they can afford it, we still don't want them to do it. And why is that? Because if we see a shift from, you know, the densest area of the cities to the less densest, what we're going to see is an increase in the number of trips made by cars, which is more pollution, more road safety problems, and among all, a lot of, you know, time wasted in trips that they are not needed. I mean, we are creating just because of the pandemics. And our response, it was to create that backyard, that need of a space the people they are experiencing right now in the public space. For example, when at some point we start, closing avenues and closing streets in different hours of the day for runners, for cyclists, to have more space for physical activity. Then also for shops, to put the shops on the street, to put the local fairs on the street. These local fairs, we used to have them, we didn't block the streets when they were operating. Now we are closing over 270 blocks in the city to allow this type of fairs go outside and with social distancing. Then we create more spaces for recreation, for bars and shops to go to the street, to put tables, to invite people to gather on the public space, because we know that the gatherings in the public space is more safe than gathering, or is safer than gatherings in closed spaces. And with this, we're seeing great results in terms of the response of the people, of the use of the public space, how they share and how they experience these new spaces that in the past, they used to be, from cars. Now they are 100% for people. And to conclude my presentation, what we are trying to do is to get something from the way out of this pandemic, that we realize that it cannot happen with higher environmental cost. If, going out from the pandemic, it means more cars, or it means people moving into the suburbs, we have a great problem here. And we want to avert that, because we've been working in the past 10 years to improve or to promote the modal shift from private car to mass transit to bicycles, and we have to keep pushing that agenda forward. And also we've been working in the past 10 years, in making the city a more pedestrian friendly and reclaiming public space for from cars to pedestrians. Well, we're pushing that agenda forward, and in a faster way, using the pandemic as the great excuse, and also because we need it. And that's why we are seeing the pandemic as an opportunity to create a more sustainable and resilient city. And I think it's our only option right now in the middle of this huge problem. Thank you very much. I hope it was clear, and I'm open.
Great, that was wonderful. I think he gave everybody a very clear idea of some of the challenges that you face, as well as some of the great interventions that have been made in the past 10 years. Before we open it up sort of to everybody's questions, although people should be putting questions into the chat box so that we can sort of line them up to allow some other voices besides mine and Juan Jose during the conversation, so we actually can have a conversation, is sort of to start with a couple of basic ideas. One is going back before the pandemic, actually. You talked about some dramatic shifts that were made in terms of introducing more public space, minimizing and shifting from a car focus to a people focus, and really increasing the sort of public transportation options in reallocating space to public transportation from private cars. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the obstacles that were faced in that process, and how they were overcome, because sort of before you could be an award-winning city, for some of these reforms, you had to actually implement them. So if you could talk a little bit about that process, I think some of our students would really like to hear.
I mean, thank you, Robin. It's a great question, because the biggest challenge always is, to get the public engagement on what you're doing. And when we started with the BRTs, with the introduction of BRTs in the city of Buenos Aires, and we started with an avenue that it's called Juan B. Justo, and it's in a neighborhood. It's an avenue that below the avenue, there's a river. So it was impossible for that avenue, for example, in the future, to have an underground subway. because it is technically impossible because we have a river there. So we said, okay, we have to start with the BRT in that avenue, because in the mind of the Porteños, the only solution for mass transit was building subways, and more subways, and all the avenues and all the overground infrastructure just for cars. But there's a problem. Argentina is a middle-income country, and the city of Buenos Aires is part of that reality. We don't have money to build as much subway as we want. So we realized that we had to introduce a different solution. And we introduced the BRT as a second best, or at least to improve the bus systems, the bus route systems in the city of Buenos Aires, which is very big and very, very used. So we started with Juan B. Justo Avenue to introduce the concept and to stop the discussion about the subway, saying, okay, we are not going to build the subway here because it's technically impossible. So the only solution available to improve the service level of the mass transit in this avenue is to build a BRT. And people was, no, we don't want a BRT. Let's build an LRT. A light rail tramway in the avenue. And we say, no, we need a BRT because we need to be flexible, the bus routes to get in and get out the BRT corridor. And we explained the population why we needed a BRT. Because, at the beginning, the neighbors used to say, that's from poor countries. And we were like, yeah, well, that's what we are, but we have to realize that we don't have money enough. And we introduced the BRT in Juan B. Justo Avenue. And after the introduction, and they saw we can reduce travel times about 55%, from 39 to 45 minutes to 25 minutes, to between 20 and 25 minutes from a 12 kilometers extension BRT corridor, when they realized it was faster, it was safer, it was reliable. They started believing in the concept of BRT. We use the Juan B. Justo Avenue as a window project, as to showcase an idea, a concept. And when people realize that type of solution works, we moved to 9 de Julio Avenue. 9 de Julio Avenue is that huge avenue you saw in the first picture on my presentation, which is like, the heart of the city. The monumental avenue is like our Champs-Élysées. Well, we put the BRT there. And at that time, it was with a lot of, public engagement issues, because the environmentalists, they said, no, but you are gonna take trees for putting infrastructure, or you're going to, the car drivers, where we are gonna lose, the speed of the avenue. It's gonna be more congested. But no one was criticizing that the BRT solution was efficient in terms of speed, reliability, and comfort for riders. And from that point, the discussion for us, it was like, okay, we already have this concept, people believe on this, so we have to build around this. And we started, for example, explaining, stop, okay, car drivers, you're right, probably you will suffer from a little bit more congestion. That's true, but you know what? 75% people moving in 9 de Julio Avenue ride buses. Only 25% ride cars. And those cars are the congestion that are also affecting buses, the 75% of the people that are choosing the most efficient, most safe transport mode. And so the discussion started to level, and we could introduce the project in 9 de Julio, but the most important is how to create the process to gain the people engagement and to make the people, believe your promise of value when you are introducing a new concept in a city. And the window project, I think it was the most successful part of this story.
So I think that's a really important point, right? The importance of public engagement, and that it's not going to be just this technical solution that you just sort of drop down and instantly people are going to sort of respond to it, that you've really got to work with folks sort of to gain acceptance, to get their inputs on what they need and what they want, right? So that sort of the process can continue to expand. So that's sort of in normal times, right? Now we're in sort of COVID, and we hope some point in the not too distant future post-COVID. That brings different kinds of challenges, right? You talked about sort of the public transport crisis, which is an issue of financing, right? Sort of at one level. There's an issue of trust and sort of safety at another level. And then I'd say sort of combining with the suburbanization, this requirement to really think at an integrated level, sort of across the different modes, but also beyond just the administrative limits of the city, right? To metropolitan areas and even beyond, right? In terms of where people are moving. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about all of those three aspects of the challenges that you're facing now, sort of with COVID, on the financing, on the integration across modes, and then on the metropolitanization.
First, I want to strike something. As in the past, before COVID, we used to work a lot on public engagement. What we are seeing right now is that the time frame of discussion and public engagement in every decision during pandemics is very short. For example, at some point we said, okay, we're going to reopen restaurants and shops and we need public space to put all the tables on the street. And it was a 1 week discussion, implementation, and everything was on the street and no one was complaining at all. And why is that? In the past, if we, close blocks to cars, it took us weeks or months, public hearings, a lot of processes, to make people believe on what we are doing. But in the middle of the pandemic, the response of the population to new public policies or new solutions to the problems where we were facing, it was also faster. And it allowed us to move forward and faster in directions that we already knew we should be going, like, reclaiming public space from cars for pedestrians or for neighbors to use for recreational or for wherever use it can come to our minds. Like, for example, even schooling. We've been starting, to put kids, close the street put the kids on the street with the teachers and reopen schools. And in terms on financing, I can tell you that our success in this problem is that we have a huge problem before the pandemic, that the first that we collect for every trip in the city of Buenos Aires only account for 20 or 30% of the cost of the subway, the commuter rail, or the bus system. That means that, seeing the demand decrease and no fare collection is not a huge impact in economical terms, because we have to put a 10% more money than we already plan to put in the mass transit system in the metropolitan area. And it is financed by the federal government, by the city of Buenos Aires, and by the Buenos Aires state government, which is the government body of the suburban metropolitan area. In terms of trust, we are always talking that we are preserving the mass transit system for the essential workers. Our limitation is that mass transit, it cannot be used by anyone right now. It can be used only by essential workers, and with a special permit they have to get. And with social distancing, with the different protocols we introduce into the operational systems, into the operational schemes of the bus companies, trains, or subway, we are telling the population that it's safe to ride them, and they are riding it in a safe way. The problem is that there's a lot of population that is not allowed to jump in. And that is the people that now is shifting to bicycles because they don't have the chance to jump into a bus. And we're also building building the path to recover the trust in the system, telling them, you know, with protocols and doing the right thing, the mass transit system is going to be safe again. It is safe right now, but it's going to be safe again for everyone. And it's difficult because mass media and a lot of, you know, researchers still talking about the risk of the mass transit, and that's not helping a lot, but we have a huge challenge there. And we are not expecting, for example, demand to recover at the 2019 level, at least for 5 or 6 years ahead. And that is why trust is one of the problems, but is not a problem, but it's a new trend. It's a home office or working from home. I mean, right now everyone is working from home, but we are talking with the private sector in how they are reimagining the office life after pandemics. And what they're telling us is they are expecting, at most of them, over 70% of the companies with headquarters here in the city of Buenos Aires, which is where headquarters for, you know, national corporations is, they're telling us that at least 30% of their workforce is going to be permanently working from home. I mean, it's not going to be back 100% again. So that is going to have an impact in the demand of mass transit. And that's why we're also putting on pause all our investment projects for the next decade. And we are, you know, starting to rediscuss them in terms of the new expectations, in terms of the new demands. We are projecting that. Right now, it's very difficult to project demand for the next 3 years, but at least because of the economical crisis we are suffering and also the uncertainty of the demand levels, we are putting on pause all the most of the infrastructure investment. We are going to keep investment in safety, in improving some service levels and some basic conditions of the services, but not to increase capacity. That is decided by now not to do it. And in metropolitan terms, in the city of Buenos Aires and in the metropolitan area, even we have a metropolitan authority, which it's only for transportation planning coordination. It doesn't have nothing to do with operation, with the discussion of the financing. I mean, those other discussions are very political, very mixed at some point, and the lack of a strong metropolitan authority, it's felt very frequently. I mean, when I met Enrique was working in the Buenos Aires state government, and we were working, and at that point we were working for the same political, you know, parties. So the coordination between the city and the Buenos Aires state, it was very transparent and very, you know, cooperative. Right now, I'm not saying it's not cooperative. There is sometimes it's a little bit more difficult because we don't have the same agenda and we don't have the same connection in terms of goals for the metropolitan area. So it's difficult. I mean, it's one of the biggest challenges we are going to face in the next few years.
And what kind of integration exists between the transportation planners and the land use planners in terms of thinking about mixed use and sort of TOD and sort of how that can help shape sort of the changes that are happening?
We are fully integrated, at least here at the city level. In fact, last year we passed a new bill with the new zoning code for the city of Buenos Aires. And this new zoning code, it was designed and thinked with the mass transit network system in mind. promoting, mixed use, high density, where we have the subway lanes or the commuter railways lanes, stations, or even the BRTs, corridors, and we're very connected. And I think we already learned in the past 10 years that we cannot work split. In the past, many decisions were taken in different offices and departments. And now, even though we still be in different departments, we work very, very close in the planning and development of the city. I mean, transportation department, it's always working for them. They have the ideas and we said, okay, we can do this, we can do that. This is the maximum capacity, or here is where we have a problem. Please don't put more cars or people on it. We were very close.
It's great. I could keep talking and asking questions, but there are lots of students and other folks that are listening in that have some questions. So I'd like to turn to some of them. I'm going to turn first to Paula Santos. Paula, do you want to unmute? Paula is actually one of my WRI colleagues who works in Brazil and works on safety issues. So she wants to focus in on safety.
Yes, thank you, Robin. Thank you very much. Thank you, Juan, for your amazing presentation. I think it's very inspiring. And we have the honor of being working with your team in Buenos Aires and supporting the Road Safety Observatory for the next 5 years. So we're very honored to have a Latin American cities such as Buenos Aires with impressive results on this area. And I'd like, we know that you are reviewing the road safety plan now that had such amazing results in the last decade. And we know also that it's difficult to reach such results, and even more difficult to reach a better result now. So I'd like to know, in your point of view, what's the main challenge for Buenos Aires to reach a bigger impact, like a Vision Zero, to reduce the fatalities to zero now?
Thank you, Paula.
Before you answer, I just like to say sort of what a star Buenos Aires is in this space. Really, it is pointed to as a place that has brought it down dramatically, and where sort of people think Vision Zero actually might be achieved, which is very, very rare. So congratulations, and we'd love to hear what your answer is.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you, Robin, for your comment. And also thank you, Paula, because I think we can achieve this with the help of many partners like WRI, also Bloomberg Philanthropies and ITDP, many others that in the process help us achieve these goals. I think when we started 12 years ago, when we arrived at the city, we were on the basics, okay, we have to improve infrastructure, and we have to enforce more to increase, the road safety level, that it was a huge and a real problem. But after a few years, we realized that they were very helpful, and we could reduce the number of casualties on road safety issues, but it was not enough. And in 2015, we shifted the idea. I mean, we said, okay, we're gonna keep doing more of this infrastructure and enforcement, but we need engagement. We need people and neighbors to engage and to be responsible of the road safety policies in the city of Buenos Aires. They don't have to be, the subjects of the policy, but they have to be the main responsibles of the policies. I mean, they have to engage. And during 2015 and part of 2016, working with NGOs, with the academia, with the kids on the schools, with the neighbors associations and local communities all over the city, we built a new road safety program for the city of Buenos Aires. Then we also use the help of organizations that URI, Bloomberg, and many others, but we built this new program. And this new program, one of the first goals was to set a government goal for road safety, that it was to decrease 30% the number of casualties. And every year we were talking that this government is committed to decrease 30% the number of casualties, because no casualty, it was like everywhere, every time. And also working with the community. Okay, we have a problem in this corner. Yes, so it's at some point it's infrastructure, but also we can work with the local school and with the shops and with to engage people in the process. And what we've seen, it was a shift in some bad habits we have in the city of Buenos Aires regarding to the people moving around in cars or in bicycles on, and people start, at least they're starting to recognize each other in the public space, because that's always the main problem, is that, you go behind the wheel in your car and you're very connected with your car and with yourself. And what we realize is that people wasn't paying attention on what was happening around them. I mean, they were paying attention, of course, to, the traffic lights, and there was people crossing, but they weren't paying attention that it's not just people crossing. It's a father with a trolley and a kid, and it's a mother waiting in the corner, and and there was public life on the street and in the public space, and they didn't recognize that public life and how what they do impacts on the public life, on what is happening on the streets. For example, usually people tend, in the neighbors meetings, they tend to say, drivers tend to say, because people cross from everywhere in the middle of the block and blah, blah. And I was like, okay, if they try to cross in the corner, which is all the infrastructure is designed for, cars won't stop. Here in the city of Buenos Aires, you are in America, in the US, everyone stops in a corner or in a stop sign. Well, here, only 19% of the people stops in a corner. 81% of drivers never stop. They think they are the ones with the priority in the intersection. And then they complain people cross in the middle of the block, in the middle of the street. Yes, because the safety perception of crossing in the middle of the street or in the corner where no one stops is the same. And so we started with these discussions, to engage the population, to realize that what they do, they have consequences, and that consequences, and we started engaging the people with the results. And I think that's part of the key process. And it's a process that you don't have to stop. It's a continue. You have to improve non-stop. You have to talk with the community, and you achieve something. Okay, which is going to be our next goal in this neighborhood? No, we have a speeding problem here. Okay, can we decrease and create a calm area with 30 kilometers maximum speed? And you have to discuss with detractors that are going to say, no 30 kilometers per hour because it's very slow. But we are, recreating that discussions in every neighborhood. I think is the way that we have to push this agenda forward. Because, for example, we are seriously thinking on reducing maximum speed in the whole city, in avenues and in streets. To do that, you have to do it with public engagement, and we are committed to that.
Great, thanks. I think Bea has a fairly specific question in response to the suburbanization challenge.
Yeah, hello. Well, first of all, thank you, Juanjo. Your presentation was super interesting. I'm just going to be very brief. My question is about, you talk about the population that's moving to the metropolitan areas of Buenos Aires, looking for bigger houses in less dense areas. And how do you think it will affect the already congested highways, such as, for example, General Paz, then going back to the new normal? And also, if you can tell us some non-structural measures you're using in Buenos Aires or you're working in, not only for the highways, but also, for example, for the downtown area.
Thank you, Bea, for your question. And I think you are from Buenos Aires because
I am.
you know General Paz very well. This is awful as an answer, but I think congestion sometimes is the best limit to a bad habit. And that's why, from my point of view, we don't have to keep, adding capacity to highways, because what we've been seeing in the city of Buenos Aires and in every city around the world, that every time we add capacity, we see more cars, and with more cars, then more congestion, more pollution, more road safety concerns. I mean, I'm not going to talk further about that because I think it's known by everyone. But what we are doing is also, to not right now, and we have to recover the trust, as we mentioned before, on the mass transit. But what we are doing is to improve the service level of mass transit, and also add more options to the community. I mean, if you live in the suburbs, okay, you need better commuter rail. And that's where we have to invest further, and we have to invest more, because if the commuter rail system, it's more reliable, it has more capacity, that people will be seduced by mass transit. We use it in these words very within our team. We have to make mass transit sexy. I mean, in terms of people have to see it and say, okay, this is the smarter way to move around. I mean, to jump in a bus or to jump on a train, because they have air conditioning, they are reliable, they have a timetable and they are committed to. I mean, those things sound very obvious, but those from Buenos Aires know that they are not that obvious here in Buenos Aires. Usually, mass transit is not as reliable, and that's what we are trying to change, and not only in the perception, but also in the service level, to make it more reliable. And that's why we have to invest in more infrastructure. And then in terms of non-structural measures, we've done something in the downtown area 7 years ago, that it's a restriction for private cars from 4 p.m. from 11 a.m. till 4 p.m., which is not allowed to get into the downtown area unless you have a permit because you are a resident and you have a permanent parking spot in the area. And with that, we could decrease around 70% the amount of cars moving around the downtown area. And after that, we could improve the pedestrian, increase the sidewalks and reduce the space for cars in the downtown area, and improve the air quality and improve the area as a whole. Why a restriction and not a congestion pricing? Because at that point, this is something good to talk about. Because at that point, what we were looking, it was the same result of the congestion pricing policy, but in a city with a lot of income inequalities. So if we introduce congestion pricing in the city of Buenos Aires, there's a portion of the population which is with higher income that is going to be cheap to move around downtown area with their own cars. But then you're going to have a middle class or a low income class, which that also needs the car, but it was not going to be, I mean, the access difference is going to be bigger than, for example, in London, central London, where the income inequality is not as big as in the city of Buenos Aires. So having that in mind, and also understanding that, talking, telling the people that you're going to charge to move around the downtown area, it was going to be very unpopular. We said, okay, let's ban. I know usually banning should be more unpopular, but when you have these income imbalances, it seems to be it's not. And so what we've done, it was to ban cars from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. 2 years ago, we increased the time span from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. and we increase the area covered by this restriction. We triple the area covered by this restriction. Right now, it's one of the biggest areas with car restrictions in the world. And it's not operating because of the pandemic right now, but we already implemented the higher area. What we don't implemented yet is the new time span from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. But the idea is after the pandemic and when we go back or start going back to normal is to increase the time band from 9 a.m. till 6 p.m.
We could go on forever and ever and ever.
I have time. I have time because it's up to you, because I don't know if you know that we made a mistake with the schedule of this meeting. So I was expecting to start right now and started 1 hour earlier, so I have more time.
Well, we'll have we can stay for a little bit longer,
Okay.
maybe. There's a question from Brian. Is Brian still on? Did he drop? Brian, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have a functioning camera here, so I don't mean to be hidden.
Your voice is what we want the most.
Okay. You've answered much of my question. It has to do with the role of cars. And speaking from a US perspective and to some extent a European one, the things you say very helpfully about engaging participants sound great, but for many motorists, it's not a question of choice among modes. They take it for granted they're going to drive, and that's been reinforced by COVID. And they take it for granted that street space is for cars. So anytime you challenge that, in my experience, it's very hard to have a dialogue because you simply have objections. And of course, that's reinforced by the fact that they tend to be the more privileged part of the population. Is that been some of your experience in Buenos Aires, and how do you deal with it?
Great question, Brian. You know, this city has, in its heritage, it has a lot from Europe, but also a lot from US. In fact, you know, the second facility outside the US that Ford introduced to manufacture cars, it was in Argentina at the beginning of the 20th century. So we have a long tradition of car manufacturing industry here, and a long tradition of, you know, the car as a way of independence and you know, self. And even though that we have a mayor that it was very, very committed to sustainability, very, very committed to increase the quality level of the people in the city of Buenos Aires, the way we live in the city of Buenos Aires, and we share the public space. From day one, it started with Macri as the mayor, which was the former president, and right now with Horacio Rodriguez Larreta, it continued. The idea that the car is not the answer to all the problems, and we cannot see the car as the only answer. And this is a city with subways, with buses, with commuter rails. Why people shift to cars? Because all the mass transit system was old. There was a lack of investment for decades, and the service level was very poor. And that's why people was feeling the only answer was car. What we've done at the beginning was to improve service level. You know, first with segregated bus lane, then with the BRT, then introducing air conditioning in the subway. 7 years ago, we don't have one railway car in the subway system, for example, with air conditioning. Also increasing the headways in the subway. We used to have a train every 5 minutes. Now we have trains every 3 minutes, increasing capacity, increasing comfort. And, you know, with that investments and with that focus is that then we felt, you know, empowered to tell the car driver, you're not allowed to do that anymore. I mean, you cannot have that privilege anymore. And why is that? Because half of the amount of the GHG gas emissions in the city of Buenos Aires comes from cars. And we have to reduce that because we are committed in the Paris Agreement to reduce that and to be carbon neutral by 2050. And to reach that goal, we have to start reducing that right now. And then you are paying a lot of money to get an apartment in the city, and then you require the city a lot of space for your car for free, to park your car everywhere for free. You spend a lot of money to raise your children in an apartment, and then for your car, you expect that to be free, for free and from the government. And we said, no, we cannot do that. We need that space for your kids too. So we need to increase the sidewalks. We need to allow for more trees, for more parks, for more, recreational areas, because that is what the public space is for. And when you start it's a process, it's an evangelization process, no? You do one step and then another step. One day you show a bus lane, and the other day you show a very shy or timid BRT, and then another day a bike lane. And after 10 years of a very consistent program, you see the progress and the shift. The problem right now is that in many cities, the gap of the mass transit is so big that, and the knowledge about these needs of reduced car travel kilometers in cities is so high that it's very difficult to achieve in a very short period. Probably the pandemic is helping us to improve and to do this faster, as I mentioned before, because people is more open to to solutions, because they are suffering from the pandemic. But it's very difficult. It takes time and a lot of explaining and commitment.
So I'd like to apologize to those whose questions we didn't get to, but we've got to respect Juan Jose's time and everybody's time. I'd like to thank Juan Jose for sort of a great presentation and for so graciously answering our questions. I think so Buenos Aires as an example of a city that has really shifted from or started the shift from being very car-centric to being people-centric has paid off in terms of people's health, in terms of safety, in terms of long-term sustainability and sort of better quality of life. And it really is an inspiration for many cities around the world, and for students and professors and those of us that are working in this space to keep working further. So thank you very much. Hopefully at some point we'll be able to do things like this in person and see each other in person in great cities like Buenos Aires or Washington. But for now, thanks to everybody, and we'll wait for the next conversation that the students will arrange. So thanks everybody.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, guys.
Everybody.